Good morning, everyone. My name is Lee Francis. My family's from the Pueblo of Laguna, and I am the CEO and founder of Native Realities, which is your one-stop shop for native nerd pop. And all you Indiginerds out there, thank you very much for having me. We'll talk a little bit more, but you saw I am in the midst of launching the first ever Indigenous Comic-Con. It starts tonight at 4 p.m. So we've got the staff freaking out right now on site, which is very fun. I just got off I was literally on the phone being like, look, I'm not answering calls for the next half hour. And I have my one of my associates and it's like my right-hand man. He's like, it's all good, dude. We called everybody. You calm down too. Look at your name. We got this. So we have a great staff. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. I also want to keep track on my time too. So today, I want to say thank you very much for allowing me to be here for Creative Mornings with all of you. To be able to talk a little bit about what we do and talk about fantasy, dreams, and the building of a new reality. And that kind of synthesizes what we do with Native Realities and the rise of the Indiginerd and sort of what that means as well. So I will get started. There we go. Hi. I'm trying to wake you up.
Yeah.
So this is me. I'm a first-class Indiginerd. I have been for about as long as I can remember. My household was very much nerd-centric, sci-fi-centric growing up. My dad was a huge sci-fi fan, to the point that he had read most of the science fiction books that were put out in the 80s. When I was growing up, and he would actually go to bookstores because they re-released these particular books with new covers, new variations, he would have to look and check the copyright date. Because it was any time from about 84 to 96 or so, he had read it. And he was like, oh, they fooled me again. They put a new cover on here. I've read this one already. He was very sad about that. So we were very much a nerd sci-fi household. And it was, it's a point of pride for me. And the idea of being an Indiginerd is somebody with, possibly an indigenous background who has, your nerd cred, right? And I think we all kind of got a good sense of that. But I've heard a really great definition of what a nerd is. And it comes from one of my poet friends up in Denver. He says, a nerd is someone that loves something wholeheartedly and unironically. And I think that that's really important to think about. The unironic part is that you can love something wholeheartedly, that you have deep knowledge about it, and that it's unironic. So you're not loving it to be cool. You're loving it because you love it. Batman. So I'm talking about fantasy. Oh, thank you. I was like, I hope some people recognize this. Because I grew up with this. For those of you that don't know, Fantasy Island, Ricardo Montalban, also, after he retired from being Khan, he brought his little buddy along with him, and they opened Fantasy Island. And I grew up on Fantasy Island, and it was one of the best shows, because I was allowed to watch a certain number of shows. I watched them with the family. My dad would sit me down, and we'd watch Fantasy Island, and then, welcome to Fantasy Island. And every week, it was the same formula as The Love Boat, basically. So it was I think it was the same writers and same scripts. The Love Boat took three main characters out, and they all got in love. And Fantasy Island took 3 main characters out, and they all got their wishes. Or so we thought, because sometimes they didn't. The whole idea about Fantasy Island was the learning part of reaching your fantasies. And so it was very key that they would tell you about this and they'd wave everybody in and, the wise olds. I think he was a ghost, is all I can say. Like, I think this existed in an entirely other realm, because he'd be like, goodbye, my friends. And then he would just evaporate. So it's really important that we start here with the concept of fantasy. And why we think about this idea of how fantasy bridges a space for new realities. So for Indigenous people, the realities are pretty stark. For Native people on this continent, for Indigenous people globally, the realities of genocide and ethnocide throughout the history is the reality that we face every single day. From our history to our present, and right now. And I don't mean just present, I mean literally this is happening right now. This is the Dakota Access Pipeline. We got people that are in the field right now. The reality is this. But there's really no place to turn to when you want to try and fantasize, because this is what we get instead. So as Indigenous people, there's not a fantasy outlet, or has not been, within the places that we can fantasize. All right? It is a hard reality that we live. And when we look to media, which is where the Fantasy Island exists, when we look to media, this is what we get within the media spaces. you get these types of representations. And historically, what these types of representations have revolved around are archetypes that were set in motion at the beginning of pop culture in the United States. These were not even particular things that we are even consciously aware of these days. The first period that we talk about actually comes back from the 1500s, and we're still dealing with this baggage. This character is called the noble savage. And the noble savage still shows up today. Avatar. This whole idea of a noble class of people, race and character of people, that offset the villainy of we'll say, the Anglos, right? Back then it would have been the Europeans, the English. Then it became the Americans. Now it's a race of aliens, okay? Which, still Americans, I guess. But the whole idea was that the noble savage is always used as a contrast. And so in the beginnings of popular culture with indigenous people, it was automatically dehumanized. So it was the existence was set as symbology. So it was used to contrast, not having a personhood, but as an ideology. What this moves into, which I haven't shown the picture of, is what we call the Vanishing Indian. So the Last of the Mohicans, which is a pop nerd. I love that movie. I'm not gonna lie. It's one of we all got our little guilty pleasures, but the best part, it's the best part of that movie. Go watch it again. The soundtrack is fantastic. But growing up with that, this idea of the last of being a space of being able to transfer all of that magical embodiment of the noble savage that moves into this particular character, which is the last of this particular race. Then we move into this particular archetype and character that we still deal with, what we call the Red Devil. And so the idea that you need to justify genocide, you need to justify mass incarceration, you need to be able to justify the actions that are taking place around the late 1800s with what we termed the Indian Wars in the United States. So you got to turn the Indian guy into a bad guy. The native person has to be a villain to justify what's happening. And it's very important that all of these periods that we understand what's taking place, because the thing about pop culture, indigenerdity, all the things that we talk about, is that it exists on a very, very broad level. It's the things that we see every single day. It's the things that we experience every single day. When we have young people that go and watch TV and there are no representations of themselves. People of color, women, all you women in the audience, there are no representations of yourselves. You get to be side characters. You get to be the one that helps out everybody. Right? And that's the same for indigenous people and people of color. And not only that, but we get these kinds of characters. Anybody see Suicide Squad? Right? How long did the native guy last? 5 minutes. He died by minute 45. He got no backstory. He bailed on all his friends, and then he died. So if this is not a pop culture representation of indigeneity, this is one of the things that we continue to struggle with. Ladies, just don't. We're equal opportunity. Comes from the Pocahontas mythos, right? So you're sexy Pocahontas all the time. And this is the type of thing. Man, look at this just melange of like culture mixed. It's not just, man, we're gonna take culture. We're taking it all. Is all I'm saying. Thank you, Victoria's Secret. Not even a native, Italian fella. Yes. And drop in the trash. Well, we call this period the neo-noble savage. This is the native that becomes really in tune with the earth all of a sudden. So everybody's like, oh, we want your mystical embodiment because you know how to communicate with the earth. Like, no, I don't. I don't. Man, I just barely roll out of bed. Leave me alone. So when there's nothing to look for, we get more of this. So in my mind, in the way that I look at fantasy, and the definition as I was thinking about this, is that fantasy is a way of changing reality. Because it creates that space for imagination and creativity. When you're on Fantasy Island, you get to think about what you are trying to accomplish, what is in your deepest heart's desire, and it creates that separation in that space. So when we think about fantasy in indigenous worlds, and when we think about fantasy for people that are underrepresented in pop culture, it's that space of saying, I get to be a superhero. And so in that, you find that gap. And that gap is you're probably not going to fly, but you begin to embody those particular aspects of that superhero. It's why kids look up to Captain America. Every kid wants the shield. What does he stand for? Truth, justice, American way. The flip side of that is colonization. All the things that we saw through history. But nonetheless, we're looking at the ideal aspects, the fantasy aspects. And fantasy for me is the way that we can look at changing this reality that we exist in. Boom. Keep you awake. So what does it look like? looks like Ryan Singer's work. All right? Here's your fantastical variation of the Battle of Shiprock. Complete with Navajo cowboy on tauntaun. Jeffrey Vereggi's work, reimagining what pop culture iconography looks like through the lens of an indigenous person from the Northwest Coast. Lagon Kenya from Puerto Rico. I think it's Edgardo Martinez is the illustrator for this. Creating a Puerto Rican superhero, woman, which is even better, for people to look forward to be able to fantasize about, because that's the space that we need to operate in. Jay Garcia's work, Tiwa Tales of Suspense, Behold the Mighty Popeye. Being able to create a new history for ourselves, which is also part of fantasy. That fantasizing about how it looks like when we are represented as the hero of the story, not a rebellion that needs to be quashed, right? And we know that all the stories that we tell are in the eyes of the beholder. Star Wars would be much different from the Empire's perspective, right? But it's not. It's told from this. So when we flip that, we create a new fantasy space where we get to occupy. Super Indian. A beautiful fantasy space where you get to occupy he was just a simple res boy, and he gained his powers through eating tainted government commodity cheese. And he has all sorts of stories to tell. Just pepper them all in here like that. So this is where we come in. So as Native Realities, we founded this about 1.5 years ago, and the idea was to be able to develop this pop culture iconography, a new set, specifically for my kid. And the kids that I used to teach when I taught at Winnacoma High School and the Native American Community Academy, where I did most of my educational career. And because I began my career as an educator, it was being able to see all of these perspectives of the ways that we work with young people. Is not only the stuff that we do in the classroom when we tell them about their history, when we have them read Native literature, but it's all the stuff that they're inundated with time after time, day after day, when they have nothing to look up to that represents themselves in popular culture. When they have no type of mass media that speaks to their heart and who they are and the lives that they live. There is no Superman for the res. He never saves those folks. He's busy saving Metropolis, right? We got no zombie hunters out there at Crown Point. There's like one comic book that does that. All right? But they don't take place in those locations. And it's because oftentimes Hollywood doesn't want to take a risk on something like that. We're a small population, I get it. But you can still tell amazing stories. And you can still find that space of fantasy where we are able, as all of us, not just as Indigenous people, but as we begin to think about what it means to live in a fantasy world, it's that connection of the reality and the fantasy, and we're trying to find that middle space. Fantasy is the way of changing reality. It's the way of putting reality in a new light and a new spin so that we become the owners of that. We begin to be able to build the reality together. And you have the chance to come see that. Yeah. I'll make my pitch. For the Indigenous Comic-Con, starting in about 6 hours. It's a great opportunity to see that as it's happening in real time. And we've been really fortunate with this kind of work to see that this is happening, not only nationally but globally as well. We're beginning to see how this is spinning out with ChicanoCon in San Francisco and LA. BlurredCon, which is the Black Nerd Con, that's out in Washington, D.C. So you're beginning to see these particular spaces, and we're all starting to network with each other. And you're beginning to see the rise of, hey, all you women folk in the audience, oh, you get a voice too at these cons as well. Because it's not exclusively the domain of the gents anymore, sorry, gents. I know it was our place, we had our dice, we could roll the dice and do our D&D. Now it's open to everybody, and it makes everything better. Because it actually creates that particular space, and we're co-creating it together. That fantasy space that is no longer fantasy when it becomes reality.
Great
so you get
logo.
Pardon?
Great logo.
Well, thank you very much. I designed it, so I'll take that. So if you get the chance, come out this weekend. We've got panels. You can learn a lot more about representation. We've got some amazing guests that are all going to talk about their particular avenues and aspects towards changing pop culture. A lot of the folks that I showed you just in the slides just a little bit ago are going to be there representing. Come out tonight, 1491s. If anybody knows the 1491 sketch comedy group, check them out on YouTube. They're amazing. They're performing tonight. They'll be in the house tomorrow. And ultimately what we're trying to do if I leave you with anything, and I leave you with this space, is to connect chocolate and peanut butter, and throw in some of the little pieces in the middle there too. I don't even know what they're supposed to represent, but chocolate and peanut butter, fantasy and reality, coming together, trying to figure out this middle space where we get to exist as human beings. Rather than this, which is what I grew up with, hully-gully gum-gum, to that, because I love that man. I'm just saying. And I don't even know if I doubt they're going to make Aquaman indigenous. Like, they're probably not going to, like, he's indigenous to Atlantis, I guess. But, like, straight up, he's my indigenous superhero. Get your Indiginerd on, everybody. Thank you very much for this time. So.